Okay, so today we are going to talk about the amazingly frustrating thing that happens when we are coming along in our knitting and we realize that we have a hole. And that hole is, it's not a moth, right? It's not anything like that. This is entirely a mistake that happens in our knitting. So I went ahead and made the mistake two different ways to sort of show you a little bit about how to fix it. A good chunk of the time, this mistake happens when you just inadvertently do a yarn over. This is very, very, very common when you're going between knits and purls. And to fix that, all we're going to do is identify the stitch that is originating from the hole, right? And we're going to pull that stitch down. So I'm simply going to move these stitches over. You can move them over, you could work to the stitch, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to move those little stitches over. I'm going to find that the one that's going to stop, right, terminate, as I would say, at that hole, and I'm going to drop it. Okay, so now that I'm looking at that, now I'm going to pick it back up and bring it back up, because if we just left it there, then we'd have all those crazy big things, and no good comes from that. But there's a little bit of a trick, because if you think about the difference between a yarn over and a make one is essentially a yarn over that's twisted, right? So if I were just to grab that same one and twist it and pick it back up, it helps close the hole, but it doesn't fix it entirely. So instead of picking up that first longer strand, I'm going to come one stitch below that first longer strand, and I'm going to twist it and then come in and pick it up, that entire row of knitting. Column, maybe I should say, of knitting. Can't find my favorite fix-it tool, so I'm using one that's not my favorite, but it still is working. Right, and I'm coming up, making sure I'm not twisting those stitches, right? That's a really important thing. So you do that by making sure that your crochet hook stays facing up the whole time. So now I've gone ahead, so it's not perfect, right? But it's a heck of a lot better than having a hole in your knitting. So you would then put that up on the needle, and when you come to it, you're then going to work a decrease, right? You would knit these two stitches together. When you do these two, you get this sort of like, if you think about it, almost like a vertical short row wedge. If you wanted to hide a little bit exactly where that decrease or increase happened in your knitting, you could actually decide to go ahead and do the increase. So I don't know, it's used the wrong word. You could decide to do the decrease, not directly above, right, but slightly off center from where that stitch was increased, to sort of help, again, minimize the appearance of that repair. Okay, so if you're making something that needs increases anyway, you could also just like let the number of stitches ride. But for the most part, we usually need to go ahead and do a decrease and get rid of that extra one. Your other choice is, of course, to rip back entirely. And that would get rid of it too. But this is all like fixing without having to rip all the way back. Okay, the other way that this stitch is done is, instead of doing a yarn over, it's what happens when we come in to the stitch, right? But instead of completing it, we just take it off the needle. And what happens is you then get a stitch and you get a yarn over next to it. And sometimes when you come up to that on your needle, you sort of realize something went wrong, but you don't really pay attention and you still purl both of them. If you're very new to knitting, you actually do a little double mistake. You twist this stitch, right? Because when you take the stitch off without knitting it, it twists the stitch. So oftentimes you'll have a hole and you'll have this funky stitch where maybe the right leg is a little bit bigger. So to fix this, this is actually two stages. I'm going to take that first one down, and I'm going to fix it essentially the same way I did the last time. If I turn that one over, I can see that that bar, the terminating bar, right, goes past this other column of stitches as well. And that's how I know not only did I sort of create that yarn over, but I did that while not knitting this stitch, right? Not finishing the stitch that's right adjacent to it. So there are a couple ways you can fix it. You can certainly fix them both at the same time. That's significantly harder. So I'm assuming if you're making this sort of mistake, you might want the slightly easier way to fix it. So we're going to come in, sorry, from the top, turn that little guy around, and we're going to grab and just pull up exactly the way we did the last time. That's my extra stitch. That goes up on the needle. Then I have to fix this one too, right? Because this is the stitch that didn't get worked and it's twisted. So we might as well not have extra things to, help us realize that there's a mistake in there. So if I take this guy all the way down here, I realize that I really do need to fix them both at the same time. So we'll take this right back down because otherwise we'll have that little thing coming up front. So we're going to come and we're going to fix this little guy first. So you'll notice that I'm sort of pulling the yarn to the side. So I don't have quite as much slack that I have to deal with. Come back right into there. This is always the point where I decide, do I just shoot another video and not show you that? But actually, I think I may just leave it because that's sort of a good thing to see. Okay, so that goes back up on my needle. And I'm just making sure that none of those were twisted and we're good. Okay, so now I have this like the same little strand of all those extra stitches. So again, I'm going to come down and I just want to, I have lots of choices. I could sort of come into any one of these stitches. My whole goal is to make the repair as least noticeable as possible, right? So I'm kind of always wanted to make that a really tight transition right there. Coming up, I think I split my stitch, I did. I missed my little metal fix-it tool, which I have 5,000 of them in my house and can never find the one I want when I want it. If need be, you can come from that direction, right, and grab all of it. But if you do that, you have to take your fix-it tool out each time if you're facing down. Otherwise, you'll twist those stitches. Okay, and there you go, right? So I fixed both the stitch, the hole, and I fixed the stitch that was twisted right next to it. And again, I would come in here and work one more decrease. And you can work them sort of anywhere. You could work them either direction. It doesn't really matter. So if you think an SSK for you is less noticeable than a knit two together, you could totally work it that way. It doesn't matter at all. But then at least as I'm coming back through and looking at my work, I have a much prettier right field. I don't have those big glaring holes there anymore, and it's not so bad. So hopefully that was helpful to you, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.